Not to value and employ men of superior ability is the way to keep the people from rivalry among themselves. Not to prize articles which are difficult to procure is the way to keep them from becoming thieves. Not to show them what is likely to excite their desires is the way to keep their minds from disorder. Therefore, the sage, in the exercise of his government, empties their minds, fills their bellies, weakens their wills, and strengthens their bones. He constantly tries to keep them without knowledge and without desire, and where there are those who have knowledge, to keep them from presuming to act on it. When there is this abstinence from action, good order is universal. I want to be direct with you about something before we go any further. Verse 3 of the Tao Te Ching is the verse that gets Lao Tzu accused of being an authoritarian, of writing a manual for control, of advising rulers to keep their people ignorant, full, and docile, the ancient equivalent of bread and circuses. And I understand why. Read those lines cold, without context, without the framework verses 1 and 2 have already built, and they can sound like the most chilling thing in the history of philosophy. A government that deliberately empties its citizens' minds, that actively suppresses knowledge, that uses physical comfort to prevent political awakening. This reading is not just wrong, it is the precise inversion of what Lao Tzu means. And the fact that it has persisted for 2.5 millennia is itself a kind of evidence. Evidence of how thoroughly we have forgotten the diagnostic framework Lao Tzu spent the first 2 verses building. Because verse 3 only makes sense if you remember what verse 2 already established, that naming something as valuable immediately creates its opposite. That the mind's construction of categories, beautiful, ugly, difficult, easy, valuable, worthless, is the source of virtually all social disorder. What Lao Tzu is describing in verse 3 is not the enforcement of ignorance. It is the withdrawal of the stimuli that manufacture ignorance of a far deeper kind. Let me show you what I mean. Lao Tzu's first diagnosis. When a society officially values and elevates people of superior ability, when it makes excellence the supreme public virtue and ranks its citizens accordingly, it has created rivalry. Not as a side effect, as an inevitable structural consequence. Because the moment society declares these people are more capable, more admirable, more worthy, every other person in that society has been handed a verdict on their own inadequacy. And the natural human response to a verdict of inadequacy is not acceptance, it is competition, striving, the exhausting, endless project of proving the verdict wrong. The sage ruler, in Lao Tzu's framework, doesn't solve this by encouraging people to try harder. The sage solves it by removing the ranking system. Not because excellence doesn't exist, but because officially prizing it creates precisely the social disorder it claims to reward its way out of. The craftsman who is absorbed in the work itself, not in how it compares to the craftsman beside him, is not less excellent. He may be more excellent because his energy is in the work, not in the watching. The second diagnosis is even simpler. When a society officially prizes objects that are rare, when difficulty of procurement becomes a marker of value, it has not created wealth. it has created deprivation. Because for every object made desirable through scarcity, it has simultaneously created a class of people who cannot have it, and who now feel the deprivation of that inability.
Theft, in Lao Tzu's framework, is not a failure of morality. It is the predictable outcome of a desire system. You cannot simultaneously tell people that a thing is supremely valuable and then act surprised when the people who cannot afford it find other ways to obtain it. The sage does not try to prevent theft through better locks or harsher punishments. The sage removes the official designation of certain things as supremely desirable. Not the things themselves, the designation, the ranking, the story that says your worth is partly measured by whether you own this.
The third diagnosis is the one that should stop anyone alive in the 21st century completely cold. Not to show them what is likely to excite their desires is the way to keep their minds from disorder. Lao Tzu wrote this in approximately the 5th century BC. He was describing a mechanism for creating a specific pathology of mind, the pathology of the continuously excited, never satisfied desire state. A mind that is shown in an endless stream the things it might want, the lives it might live, the bodies it might have, the objects it might own, and that never arrives at any of them, because there is always another image already loading behind the one it's looking at. The disorder Lao Tzu is describing is not political unrest. It is something quieter and more fundamental. A mind that cannot find rest because the culture it lives in is specifically designed to prevent rest. A mind in a state of permanent low-grade craving that it did not choose and cannot easily leave. He called this the disorder of minds. We call it anxiety. We call it depression. We call it doom scrolling and FOMO and the void. 25 centuries apart, the same condition.
And so, the sage, the leader who has understood what the first two verses established, responds to these three manufactured disorders with 4 actions. Actions that are not the imposition of control. They are the removal of the mechanisms that created the disorder in the first place. Empty their minds.
This is the line that sounds most authoritarian, and it is the most misread of the 4. To empty the mind, in Taoist understanding, is not to make it blank or stupid. It is to remove the accumulated cultural programming that fills it with manufactured desire, with comparison, with the endless evaluative chatter of a ranking society. It is the same emptiness that verse 1 described as the nameless origin of all things, not void, but spacious. The emptiness of a mind that is not cluttered with what it has been told to want.
Fill their bellies.
This is the only unambiguously physical prescription in the verse, and it is the foundation of everything else. A genuinely hungry person cannot practice philosophy, cannot cultivate stillness, cannot choose anything beyond the most immediate relief of the most immediate need. The sage's first material obligation is real sufficiency. Not luxury, not abundance beyond need, but genuine meeting of genuine hunger. Before minds can be emptied of manufactured desire, bellies must be filled of actual necessity.
Weaken their wills.
The will that Lao Tzu wants to weaken is not the will to live or to create or to love. It is the ego's specific willfulness, the relentless drive to impose, to compete, to acquire, to prove. The same willfulness that verse 2 described as the source of rivalry, theft, and disorder. To weaken this is not to produce passivity. It is to produce something the Taoist tradition values above all else: responsiveness, the capacity to act from genuine perception of what a situation requires, rather than from the ego's pre-formed agenda.
And finally, strengthen their bones.
Where the mind is emptied, the body is fortified. Where the will is released, the foundation is strengthened. Bones are the structure beneath everything visible, the part that endures when the surface changes. The sage's governance does not produce compliant subjects. It produces people with genuine structural integrity. People whose stability does not depend on external comparison, external acquisition, or external validation.
Empty minds, full bellies, released wills, strengthened foundations. This is not a recipe for a controlled population. It is a recipe for a genuinely free one. Here is what the modern world has done with each of Lao Tzu's 3 warnings. Prize ability above all else, and we have built entire industries around ranking, rating, comparing, and publicly displaying the result. Social media follow accounts, university league tables, net worth lists, personal brand. The metricization of human worth at a scale that makes any ancient aristocracy look modest by comparison. Prize articles that are difficult to procure. And we have built a multi-trillion-dollar desire manufacturing apparatus whose entire business model depends on ensuring that no one ever feels they have quite enough, that the thing just purchased is already slightly insufficient, that the next version is the one that will finally satisfy what the last version didn't. Show people what is likely to excite their desires, and we have built the most sophisticated desire display system in human history. The algorithm does not show you what is true or important or nourishing. It shows you what will excite your desire just enough to keep you from putting the device down. This is not a side effect of the attention economy. It is its entire operating principle. Lao Tzu's 3 conditions for universal disorder: rivalry, theft, disorder of minds. Our civilization has optimized for all 3, simultaneously, deliberately, and profitably, and then expressed genuine confusion about the anxiety, the loneliness, the hollowness, and the division that have followed. This is not an accident, and it is not inevitable. Verse 3 is not a relic, it is a diagnosis, more precise and more urgent than anything currently in a policy document or a mental health guidebook. The prescription it offers is not complex. Remove the prize from the ranking. Remove the glory from the scarce. Remove the display from the desirable. Not by force, by wisdom. Not through control, through the quiet refusal to participate in the system that manufactures what it claims to cure.
The sage does nothing, and everything comes to good order. Verse 3. 500 years before the Roman Empire, still waiting to be read correctly.